Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we are here with one of our 5-minute histories videos. If you tuned in yesterday, we talked about cast iron buildings. It did not get through nearly all of what we wanted to, and blew past our 5-minute deadline by a mile. So today we're going to go a little bit more lickety-split, but we're going to do part 2 of cast iron buildings in Baltimore. But before we do that, I want to read a short note we got from one of our viewers, and it inspired me. That's why I'm going to read it. She writes, "One of my new quarantine pastimes is driving around the city, exploring new areas early in the morning when the traffic is light. I don't usually get out of my car, so I'm following all the health and safety guidelines. These little histories have inspired many drives to amazing places that were right under our noses. Thank you." Well, thank you, because that got me thinking, what if we did some of these histories specifically tailored to folks who could drive around and take a look at really neat places without getting out of their car? And that's what we're going to try to do today. We're going to start with the A.S. Abel building at the corner of Utah and Baltimore Streets. If you remember from yesterday, A.S. Abel was the founder of the Baltimore Sun. He had the first all cast iron building built in America in the 1850s. And he must have really loved cast iron, because he built this building, which was a warehouse, an investment property, with cast iron included in it. It is a tremendous building, 250 feet long, 8 stories high, really, really magnificent. Just think of, it was kind of like the Amazon warehouse of its day. Think of what an Amazon warehouse looks like, and then take a look at this building. No comparison, of course. Most of the tenants were related to the garment industry. That's what was going on downtown at the time in that area. But some of the tenants were different than that. There was a saddle maker, there was a cigar company, there was a confectioner, there was a lithograph company. Can you imagine the cacophony of smells coming out of that building in its heyday when it was rolling? All right, final note on that, because we're going lickety-split. Final note on this building. The cast iron is only on the first floor. It's on the storefront. It wraps around the building, so it's pretty neat. But what cast iron allowed was that it could be skinnier, it could be thinner than stone and still support the same amount of weight. And what that allowed for was big openings on the first floors, big door openings and particularly big window openings. You could put plate glass in between the cast iron columns. And that helped usher in what we now know as window shopping. All right, lickety-split. We're going to go around the corner. Let me get the address right. We're on Baltimore Street. It's 322 West Baltimore Street, the Alberti Building building. And it is one of the most magnificent cast iron buildings we have left in the city. It's all cast iron. All floors are cast iron. And it is definitely the most heavily decorated one that we have. Just imagine in our heyday, we had something like 150 buildings downtown looking like this. It must have just been stunning. Alberti Company was importers of fine and fancy goods, so I guess they had a fancy building to go with their fancy goods. And they did well for a while, but eventually sold the building to a company called Rogue and Koch. They were German immigrants who came, and they sold also fancy stuff, but also instruments, musical instruments and toys. In the heyday, downtown Baltimore had something like upwards of 30 German musical instrument manufacturers. Knabe pianos, maybe the most famous, but violins and all sorts of things. And a lot of German toy companies. One of Rogue and Koch's neighbors was a toy company called the Toy Bazaar. It was founded by a German immigrant. Get this German name, Friedrich August Otto Schwarz. Doesn't get more German than that. He founded his toy company in Baltimore in 1862. In 1870, he moved and eventually changed his name to something that I know we all will recognize, F.A.O. Schwarz. All right, lickety-split, we're gonna head across Baltimore Street. So if you're in your car, keep going east on Baltimore, go all the way through downtown, cross over President Street, and take an immediate right onto Front Street. And we're gonna go take a look at the Fava Fruit Company building. And this is really a great story. The Fava Fruit Company building, it's the big red one that's right there between Baltimore and Lombard Streets on Front. But it started its life in the 1860s on Charles Street, just south of Pratt. That's right, south of Pratt. Get that image in your head. And it started as the W.R. Thomas Oyster and Fruit Packing Company. This was in a day when we had dozens, literally dozens of oyster packing companies along the harbor. But eventually the Fava Fruit Company took over the building, used it as a warehouse for their fruit imports through the harbor. But in the 1970s, 1977, the city decided we needed a convention center and the building had to go. And the housing commissioner at the time, a gentleman whose name may be familiar, Bob Embry, and actually I don't know why the housing commissioner was involved with the decision to locate a convention center, but anyway, he was involved. He pledged that rather than demolish the building, they would dismantle the cast iron, house it, and someday it would be re-erected. And in fact, that happened. In 1997, so 20 years later, the Fava Fruit Company building was re-erected where it is now on Front Street. And it's a great story. The building was something like 125 feet long, but the architects, a firm called Peterson Brickbower, thought that if they erected that whole city block of cast iron, that would overwhelm the smaller buildings in Old Town, particularly the Carroll Mansion next door. So I think the term is crenellated it. They folded it like an accordion, and that's why it looks what it does today. Some other neat stories, by the time they got to it, about 50% of the original cast iron was missing or too rusty to be salvaged. And they had a tight budget, so they fabricated new pieces out of cast aluminum. So a fun game you can do is take a magnet off your refrigerator and go down to the building and stick it on various parts. And where it sticks, that's cast iron, and where it doesn't, that's cast aluminum. Final story is, our final thing is that on the interiors, the architects decided that they didn't want to do a modern interior. So the building is 1997 with a front that's from the 1860s. So new building, old front. But the interior of the new building, they didn't want to be modern. That would be too jarring. So they looked to the palaces of Venice for examples. And in particularly the School of St. Rocco on the Grand Canal in Venice with huge sweeping interiors and high ceilings. So that's what it's like on the inside. And I'll leave you with this final note that the firm, Peterson Brickbower, that did such a loving job of recreating this historic cast iron building, one of its other great examples is the main terminal at BWI Airport, a fantastically modern space that's celebrated today. So that's it for cast iron, and we'll see you tomorrow.